Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Hana Zara Octaviola. Today I am going to explain about my lesson plan. Pertama, saya meminta maaf terlebih dahulu jika kalian ada melihat font yang berbeda seperti ini. Sudah saya ubah, tetapi saat dijadikan file PDF masih saja seperti ini. Baiklah, back to the topic. Name of teacher Hana Zara Octaviola. Name of school SMPN 11I. Subject English. Grade 9. Topic is Sangkuriang chapter 10. Text type is narrative text. Skill that I choose writing and speaking. Time allocation 1 time 15 minutes. For the core competence, this is based on government. So we next to the basic competence and indicators of competence achievement. For basic competence, this is based on government. So we have to choose basic competence that's suitable in your text type. Okay, the first 3.7. The basic competence is to compare social functions, text structure, and linguistic elements of several oral and written narrative texts with giving and asking for information related to fairy tales, short and simple according to the context of their use. And the second, 4.7, to capture contextual meaning, related social functions, text structure, and linguistic elements of narrative text, oral and written, short and simple, related to fairy tales. For the indicators of competence achievement, 3.7.1, to identify structure of narrative text with giving and asking for information related to fairy tales, short and simple according to the context of their use. 3.7.2, to describe narrative texts about fairy tales according to the structure with correct pronunciation. The next indicators, 4.7.1, to analyze contextual meaning from narrative text about folktales. I'm sorry, this is fairy tales that is interesting and suitable. 4.7.2, to create, summarize, and moral value narrative text about fairy tales and explain loudly, clearly, correctly in front of class. And the next is learning objective. In the end of class, the student will be able to identify structured narrative text with giving and asking information related to fairy tales and describe narrative text with correct pronunciation. Second, the student will be able to present their work in front of class and can explain, summarize, and moral value of narrative text about fairy tales with good intonations. And next, attitudes, values, focus. First, religious. 2, nationalist. 3, integrity. 4, mutual cooperation. And for learning materials, we can see the concept. A narrative text is an imaginative story to entertain people. This is the meaning of narrative text. And this is example of narrative text, Sangkuriang. Next principle, for generic structure, orientation, complication, resolution, coda or reorientation, this is optional, And for language features, using adverbia phrase like a long time ago, once upon a time, and using past tense to implement situation in the past like lived, came. Okay, next is procedure. Write the structure and summarize of narrative text about Sangkuriang and explain to the other. And next, learning material for remedial. A narrative text about fairy tales that is interesting and suitable with asking and giving for information according to the context of their use. And the next, learning material for enrichment. Social function, generic structure, and language features and narrative text in theme of fairy tales Sangkuriang, both written and oral. For learning method, I use for the first approach, scientific approach. Second, learning model, CLT, or communicative language teaching. For learning media, the first whiteboard, second board marker, 3 laptop, 4 textbook, and 5 picture. And learning sources, first Kementerian Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan tahun 2017. Judulnya buku siswa mata pelajaran bahasa Inggris kelas 9, Jakarta, penerbit Kementerian Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan. Second, Pinterest. 3, internet. You can see this is search or link. 4, another relevant searches. Next is teaching and learning activity. For opening activity, the time is 2 minutes. In the opening activity, teacher do orientation, apperception, motivation, and giving references. Opening activities is the activity before we start the lesson. And next, main activity, the time is 12 minutes. In the main activity, you can see stimulation. In this stimulation, by doing some ways, viewing, observing, reading, and listening. For reading, students are asked to read material from textbooks or other supporting books, from the internet or related material, and narrative text about fairy tales. For listening, students are asked to listen to the material given by the teacher, which is related to narrative text about fairy tales on chapter 10, page 190. Next, describe narrative text about fairy tales. Next is problem statement or question or problem identification. The teacher gives students the opportunity to identify as many questions as possible related to the picture presented and will be answered through learning activities. For example, what is narrative text? What is the purpose of narrative text? What are generic structures of narrative text? And the student have to answer the question like the meaning of narrative text is, the purpose of narrative text is, the generic structure of narrative text are. And next, data collection. Okay. For reading other sources beside textbook, students are asked to explore their knowledge by reading reference books about how to identify structure of narrative text that is interesting and suitable. Representing and activities. Learners do the following activities are the students work in pairs that analyze the structure, meaning, and summarize of narrative text based on video. The students discuss it with other friends, discussing, reviewing, and exchange information about how to create, summarize, and moral value of narrative text. And next, data processing. For data processing, students in their group discuss processing the observational data in a way, discussing about the data, like how to identify structure of narrative text about fairy tales. Second, how to describe narrative text about fairy tales according to the structure with good pronunciation. And the third, how to create, summarize, and moral value that are interesting and suitable. And the next, verification. In verification, present in front of class, they're about their assignment of narrative text. So the student and teacher discuss together about their narrative texts that have been made by the students. And next, generalization. For the generalization, present the results of the classical group discussion about summary and moral value of narrative texts that are interesting and suitable and explain with loudly, clearly, and correctly. Summarize the important points that emerged in the new learning activities carried out in the form of a written observation report about summary and moral value that are interesting and suitable. Okay, the last is closing activity. This time is 1 minute. Student, for the student making summary, scheduling homework, scheduling project, and for the teacher, checking student work completed immediately and give award to groups that have good performance and collaboration. For assessment, remedial, and enrichment. First, assessment technique for effective and the observation. Assessment is based on observing the attitudes and behaviors of students, but related to the learning process and in general. Direct observation made by the teacher. So you can see the student name is Sofia Apriska, and this religious, nationalist, integrity, and mutual cooperation. For the cognitive is written test and psychomotor performance. From this learning process, the students are able to write down and fill the blank of narrative text about fairy tales. And the student explain about their summaries and moral value that they get from narrative text. And the last is rubric. And for the rubric, we have to suitable in the skill that we use. I use skill writing and speaking. So this is rubric aspect of writing assessment. There are suitability, grammatical, vocabulary, and clarity of meaning. An aspect of speaking assessment, grammar, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, pronunciation, task accomplishment. Banjarmasin, April 2020. Teacher Hanazara Octaviola. Okay, that is my explanation about my lesson plan. I'm sorry for any mistake. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.